our next guest skill, biggest skill, he's got many of them, is talking about all matters related to education and the Leaving Cert. And the reason that Dan Sheedy, the principal of the Tuition Centre, is with us is to talk about this situation with the higher level biology paper. The State Examinations Commission apologising after an error was discovered. And while teachers and students have generally described the exam as fair and accessible, a mistake in a genetics question has caused confusion for some candidates. So to discuss that and what it means for students in the Leaving Cert in general, Dan Sheedy with me now. Good morning to you.
Hey Alan, back in the banner.
Back in the banner and dealing with a bit of a controversy. I mean, from your perspective at the Tuition Centre, obviously you have people coming to you studying for the Leaving Cert. What have you made of I guess the general reaction to it first? There was a positive reaction to it prior to this mistake emerging. I suppose the calm before the storm. Maybe talk a bit about that, but just the reaction to the Leaving Cert papers overall that have been done so far.
I think controversy on top of controversy here. The biology following relatively hot on the heels of maths paper 1, which we'll come to in a while.
Quite taxing, I believe.
Quite taxing. It's a polite way to describe it. Look, it's tough going. The Leaving Cert exams are high stakes exams. We've talked about that before. They do create stress on students, which is not a bad thing in many ways. But we want genuine stress. We want fair stress. We don't want possibly the type of stress we've seen over the last few days. So it's difficult for the students involved, difficult without a doubt for the parents. I mean, I think anyone who understands education will understand that education is an emotional thing. Parents become emotionally invested in their children, particularly during exam periods. And obviously there's the natural emotion that the child has, believing that these exams will dictate what they do for the rest of their life. And that may not be true, of course, but nonetheless it exists, and we have to accept that stress exists. So, I've set papers, Alan. I've set mock papers for 20 years. I know people who've set Leaving Cert papers. It is not an easy process. There's no doubt about it. It's a challenging process, particularly in maths and in the sciences like biology. So, in general, most of the Leaving Cert papers have been very well received. I mean, these are state exams, higher level papers. They have to be difficult. I mean,
they're higher level for a reason.
Higher level for a reason. I mean, I used to say the exam paper's not going to lay down in front of you like someone you'd want to. But it's when it crosses that threshold, and whether it's true or not, when students start to perceive that exam has been unfair, and that 2 years of work, and what they think, Alan, I didn't get a chance to show how good I am.
Yeah, and I guess if you've put in a couple of years of really hard work, or even if you woke up around Christmas and started studying your backside off, you will feel like all that effort has been for nothing if you encounter this kind of situation, be it the difficult maths paper 1 or this issue with the biology paper. So for people not fully across it, Dan, can you talk to us a little bit about the error in question 16 and what the mistake was?
We'll hit the biology first. I suppose the first thing to say is, by the way, the error in terms of the outcomes and marking schemes, every student is going to benefit from this. It's the psychological impact during the exam and the stress, which we'll talk about in a second. But both in the maths paper and the biology paper, any Leaving Cert parents or students who are out there now, you are going to be fine. And
just on that, the SEC has said no candidate will be disadvantaged. The marking scheme will be adjusted.
Absolutely. And I've been at those marking conferences, and again, everyone's in it for the kids. So don't worry about losing marks or not gaining marks. The net effect actually will be a beneficial impact, but it's the effect that may have had psychologically during the exam we'll come back to. But just kind of explain what the mistake was in biology. When we set papers, very often if we're asking a question that we think is slightly challenging, what we'll do is we'll put in a stimulus above it, a diagram, and the diagram is intended to stimulate the student's memory and actually help them answer the question. So in this question, students were asked the difference between mitosis and meiosis. I wouldn't be a brilliant biology teacher at all now, but basically it's quite simplistic. I think mitosis, the chromosomes remain the same from the parent, whereas meiosis, there's a splitting of them, there's halves. So the question itself is simple. Explain mitosis, explain meiosis. The diagram above was intended to help that. So the diagram above, I actually have it here in front of me. You have the parent cell splitting into, and parent cell says 2N, and the two daughter cells below it say 2N, and that's perfectly fine for meiosis or mitosis. The second diagram then is supposed to stimulate the students and help them remember what meiosis is. So the parent cell above is 2N. So if it's half, it should be below it. All the daughter cells should be N. But they weren't. They said 2N. Now, like it is hard to believe that got through the system. and I'm not a biology teacher.
Because any Leaving Cert paper that's put together, I'm sure goes through rigorous checks.
Oh my God. I mean, I make mock papers, and I have 2 proofers. So I make the paper out, it goes to my first proofer, they send it back to me. Then, of course, I'm relentlessly looking at it to make sure I don't look like an idiot when the paper comes out. Then it goes to graphic design, and editing comes back. It's another proof. And I would say the SEC have much better, to be fair, processes than we have. So it strikes me as a very simple error that might have happened, whereby a later draft wasn't put in and an earlier draft accidentally went through. Like, you can be certain no examiner said, I'm going to get them here. You know, this is an honest, genuine, and I've been dealing a lot with the SEC.
As you said, Danny, the fact they're providing the graph, the illustration, is to help the students. So they're not trying to intentionally catch them out or make it harder.
No, and I work a lot with the SEC in the last month or two. Actually, I've been liaising with them over numerous issues, and they're wonderful to deal with, to be fair. I have to say, they're really wonderful to deal with. There's no one going to feel worse about this than the chief examiner and the person who set the paper. Now, benefits to students. We'll go to the negatives for students, and then we'll give the benefits for students.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. I mean, the SEC said, no AI software applications were used in the development of the biology paper, including any of the graphics you've outlined, the error that occurred. They're saying at no stage of any examination questions being developed using AI software applications. In the acknowledgements, it does say diagrams in question 16A on page 7, and it references biorender.com. And Biorender is a standard scientific illustration and infographic software that isn't purely AI, but has increasingly integrated AI features to speed up figure creation. So I wonder what you make of that, and does it highlight, the difficulty in putting these papers together using these kind of softwares can be advantageous, but it just shows you just have to be kind of careful as well.
You have to be very careful. I mean, I'm currently creating the Leaving Cert Geography mock paper for 2027. So you start that far in advance, and the SEC start even earlier. And yeah, of course, I have to find diagrams, I have to find photographs, I have to find questions. So of course you go into your AIs and you have a look. But you know what I've found is, and my boss, Philip, would often say, what makes a great teacher and examiner a great teacher and examiner? It's the nuance of the exam. An AI does not understand the nuance of a course, a syllabus, or an exam. And so when I look at AI and I look at to generate an image of coastal erosion for me, for example, you're checking it over 6 times because they don't know the nuance of the exam. They might read the syllabus and they might look at past papers. So again, I would say, in fairness to the SEC and in fairness to the company you mentioned, if 0.001% of what you use is AI, you have to put that on your website that AI is used. So I would be skeptical that AI played any role in this, I have to say. I really would.
Regardless of whether it did or not, as you said, there's enough checkpoints, shall we call them, where this should have been picked up. But of course, we're humans, and to be human is to be fallible.
And no one went out to hurt anyone here, and I do really, obviously my first sympathy is live with the students, and we'll come to them in a second, but I do have awful sympathy for the people who set the paper and proofed the paper, because just professionally that's tough on them at the moment as well, to be fair,
So look, as you said, the SEC are going to make sure no students disadvantaged. They'd be glad to hear that. It's more just, as you say, the kind of, I guess, psychological impact in the here and now of the exam, and if it threw them off, if they got to that, they're like, no, I know. They started doubting themselves.
Yeah,
and actually they turned out to be, with the benefit of hindsight, correct, and what it meant for the rest of the paper.
And to me, this is the real issue. Every Leaving Cert biology student out there, I can tell you now, what will happen is, at the marking conference, anyone who attempted those questions, 3% of the paper, they'll be given full marks. So that's it. It's what happened during the exam, and any sort of educational assessment research that I've ever looked at, it shows that a confidence disruptor in the exam can have significant impact for the remainder of the exam, even in completely unrelated material. Yeah. And in layman's terms, what that kind of means is, if you feel really bad early in the exam for one question, it can really hurt you for later questions. And we know
it affects your focus.
It affects your focus, your adrenaline. These kids are in a vulnerable spot. These are high stakes exams, so the adrenaline is pumping, the heart rate is going. We all remember when all of us are examined in any way, we feel those emotions, and that is exemplified, or amplified, I should say, for Leaving Cert. So the danger for a Leaving Cert student is, a student who looked at this diagram and said, look, they've made a mistake. Now that takes a lot of confidence in an exam for a student to do that. Obviously they'll be fine. A student who really got upset over it and confused over it, they'll be fine for that question. But the mistakes they made later, because of the stress that created, probably won't be able to be addressed in the marking scheme. And that's the real issue here. It will have impacted students. It is an emotional time. Students are vulnerable, and you expect not to have to correct the paper yourself and say, well, I think they've made a mistake here, and I'm going to be confident enough to say I'm grand and move on. So that to me is the issue this has created for students. How did it affect my other questions in the exam, given the state and the emotional state it put me in.
Let's get on to the maths paper. Paper 1 described as difficult. When we say difficult, just how difficult was it?
Feedback from students now on maths paper 1. This was extremely challenging.
You need to have the brain of an astrophysicist to be able to get through it.
Yeah, like it's a tough one. So like if I just briefly kind of outline what happened in the maths, it seems. I was talking to my head of maths on about this an awful lot over the last few days. Like maths is broken into questions 1 to 6, I think, which are short questions, and 7, 8, 9, 10, which are long questions. And in the first 6 short questions, you're allowed to leave out 1, and in the long questions, you're allowed to leave out 1. So most students will get into the exam, and Leaving Cert students, you're probably out there now, hope I get this right. You'll get into the exam and you looked at question 6 in the short questions, I'm not doing that. And then question 10 in the long questions, I'm not doing that. And then your attitude might have been, grand. There's the 2 I'm leaving out. You would have done your short questions, Alan, all good. But then you would have come on to the long questions. You would have done question 7. Hard, Leaving Cert Honours Maths. But then you came to your next 2, question 8 and question 9. And the feedback seems to have been, mama, these were
equally hard or harder.
Tough, very tough, very wordy, lots of long sentences. And what students want to do, Alan, is they want to find where the maths is in the question. So where's my maths? Where do I find what they're looking for so I can work it out? And then in question 8, they couldn't find the maths, and tension and nervous come up. Then in question 9, they're struggling. So now they're thinking, maybe I will have to do that awful question 10. And I think the whole maths paper 1 exam is a little bit analogous, believe it or not, to a round of golf. So if you play a round of golf, it's 18 holes. And if the last 5 holes or 4 holes, you play atrociously, you don't remember the great first 14.
No.
So a lot of Leaving Cert students out there, they will have done brilliantly in the short questions. They will have done really well in question 7. But for the last 40 minutes of that exam, they were on those last 4 or 5 golf holes. And when they come out after the exam, all they remember is how really difficult those last questions were. So here's, we'll be able to give them succour now. We'll be able to give them help here.
Okay, we've talked about how the situation is going to be rectified in terms of the biology paper. Dan, what will happen as a result of the feedback coming from maths paper 1? I'm sure after every Leaving Cert, there's meetings on, how do we feel that went? What was the general reaction from students, parents, and is there anything we should learn come 2027? I guess this is going to come up in terms of how maths paper 1 is moulded and shaped for next year.
And even ahead of next year, the main conversation will be about the marking conference up in Athlone that's going to be held in the next few weeks about the paper itself. So what happens, guys, is this. The main examiners and the advising examiners will sit down and look at this paper. They'll send out the corrections. They'll get the first 20 back from every examiner. But again, I'll keep the analogy going. When you finish a round of golf at 18, that's your score. But what will happen in the maths exam is they'll go back and they'll look at those first 14 holes and they'll say, we're going to give you a better score for those to compensate for the end. So question 1 in maths, question 2 in maths, question 3 in maths, they can reweight them. Okay. They can allocate you more marks for the earlier parts of the exam that you found easy. So you might have spent, Alan, 2 minutes on a part of question 1. They're going to up the marks for those 2 minutes. You might have spent 20 minutes on those awful questions 8 and 9 and 10. They're going to reduce the marks that those are worth. So they'll change the weighting. So Leaving Cert students out there, while it might have felt you came off the golf course and the last 5 holes were awful, it's okay. We're going to go back and we're going to give you a really much better score for the earlier questions that you did well in. And so I think what's going to happen on results day, Alan, is students are going to come out and say, do you know what? I did better than I thought in maths.
So there you go. If any students there felt like grabbing those metaphorical golf clubs and banging them off the ground and bending them, no need to do that. Finally, Dan, for students who may be trying to, even in light of hearing about how these situations are going to be remedied, who might be worrying about the rest of their Leaving Cert and if they're going to encounter any more difficult papers or any potential errors, what would your advice be to them as they move on to the remaining exams? Okay,
well, I've also supervised the exam myself, and every person who's standing in the room supervising the exams, they have a page list of corrections. And if a mistake has been identified in a paper before it goes to the students, they read them out before the exam. So what's going to happen now is every examiner in the country is going to be examining their paper, triple checking it, double checking it, and they will find any other mistakes, and they'll be read out to you before the exam. So I would confidently say there will be no more mistakes in any Leaving Cert papers, and if there are, they'll be read out to you before the exam.
There you go. Hopefully that'll give you all a little bit of comfort if you're doing your leaving. Dan, a pleasure having you in to take us through all of that. God, I tell you what, it's just making me glad I don't have to sit my Leaving Cert again.
Where's the Leaving Cert winner? We're all waiting for this Leaving Cert winner.
Exactly. I would have thought there was no leaving on at all with the way things are outside the window. God, thanks for reminding me of that, Dan. Anyway, I suppose you have to go back out into it. So there you go.
I tried driving back down to the market in Fergus now.
Dan Sheedy, the principal of the Tuition Centre, with us on Morning Folk.